basically is not just okay, it's almost like this lot is waiting for a home to be on it. This little neighborhood is such a gem, and I think one of the features that makes it so suitable for infill is its connectedness, and the walk path that's just close to this, which would take the residents through to Royal Oak. This is exactly, I think, what we're looking for with infill, and I think the proponent has certainly a history of working in this community and in the Greater Victoria area, and I think we are moving in a very low-risk area by putting this forward to the next steps.
Thank you. Would any of the members of council like to speak? Seeing none, I'll call a question on the recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, Madam Clerk, would you please introduce the next item?
Thank you. This next item is 3777 Waring Place. It's a development variance application. The report of the Director of Planning is recommending the council approve the development variance permit for proposed construction of the use of a land dwelling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for staff before I ask the applicant forward? All right, I'd like to welcome the applicant to the microphone.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
A familiar face.
My name is Roger Tinney. I'm the project planner for the application this evening, which is a single-family home. And with me also is the project biologist, Patrick Lucy, and the property owner here is here as well. So between the three of us, we should be able to answer any questions you might have. I have a small PowerPoint presentation which I sent to staff earlier today, and I don't seem to see it on the laptop. Although, you might want to...
Over to staff to figure that out.
The property is in Cadbro Bay on Waring Place, and it's currently zoned RS 12A, single-family residential. Up until fairly recently, there was sort of a dilapidated cottage on the property. It has since been demolished, so it's a vacant lot now. And this is a property that at least some of the council members would have seen in previous times. This owner has acquired it fairly recently, but a number of years ago, the former owner had been to council with a design with very similar variances for heights and setbacks and that sort of thing. It's an interesting property. Aside from its beauty right on the ocean, it has a number of aspects to it that make it a tiny bit challenging to build on. Now, this slide here starts to elaborate on some of those challenges. The application, as you know from your agenda packages, for a development permit and an environmental DP. Hobbs Creek runs down the north side of the property and discharges into the ocean. You can see the yellow lines, I can use the mouse, running across the back half of the property is the environmental backshore requirements for 15-meter setback. And also across the street is Mystic Pond, and the large yellow circle represents a well-established herondry. So between those features, it makes the property a little bit challenging, not to mention the fact that all of the properties along this frontage are fairly low in elevation, and storm surge and rising tide has to be taken into consideration as well in terms of finished floor elevations and footings and pilings. And that's just a more close-up view of the EDPA that runs across the back of the property and Hobbs Creek to the north. As a result of all of those items, the property owner wisely brought Patrick Lucy and his Aquatex team on board very early in the design phase. And there are a number of features on the property, again, that would be in your agenda package that certainly were of interest to me. The invasive plant species, two of which run down the Hobbs Creek area, have to be handled in a very detailed manner, well beyond the scope of my expertise, but if anybody wants to delve deeper into what all that means, Patrick Lucy's here and can certainly speak to that. Patrick also worked closely with the landscape architect in coming up with an appropriate landscape scheme that was suitable not only for the riparian area of Hobbs Creek, but also the shoreline area that fronts the beach. And of course, Patrick and the landscape architect worked closely with the Saanich environmental planner in coming up with this very detailed scheme. What all that means in terms of the new homeowner in trying to build a house on this property is everything gets pushed to the front corner of the lot. And as a result of that, front yard setback variance is requested, a building height variance is requested, and there's also a rear yard variance requested because of the fairly large EDPA that runs across the back of the property. This little data table, which probably is in your agenda package somewhere, at the bottom of the data table outlines the 4 variances that are being requested, the ones that I just mentioned: front yard setback, rear yard setback, and building height. And there's actually 2 components to the building height. One is just the overall building height, and one is called single-face building height. The overall building height from this zone RS12A is set at 5 meters, which is unusually low for a residential property. Normally it's 7.5. But in the RS12A, they have established it at 5 meters and also specified a single-face building height. And that's a feature that you see more commonly on steep sloped properties. And now as you work your way up the bank towards Cowrill Bay Road, that situation exists, and you see a lot through the Cordova Bay area as well, in the Wesley Road area. There's some RS12A properties. In this instance, the site is flat, but the single-face building height regulation still applies. And without getting into the minutiae, it just means there's a couple of centimeters difference between the overall building height and single-face building height, but both have to be referenced as a variance. I've just included these images for interest's sake, as well as for members of the public who might not be familiar or have the detailed agenda package. This is an artist's rendering of what the finished product will look like from here in place. They didn't go to the extent of putting all the detailed landscape architecture into the image. They just simply have shown grass as a green lawn. But it gives you an idea of what the house looks like. It's modern in style, 2 stories with a flat roof. And this is a view from the back. It's a little bit hard in perhaps your agenda package because it's all 2-dimensional, but there is a swimming pool at the back of the property, and it's really more of a kid's pool as opposed to a swimming pool. It's not large in scale, but more an opportunity just for some children to play in a shallow pool that's fairly modest in size. There's one feature that's interesting that is not mentioned in your package, though, which I was talking to the planning staff today about, which is the building itself. Will it be built green, gold, or silver, or various aspects of it, of Energite 82 perhaps? The owner is always very keen for new and innovative products, and he's going to be installing, which will probably be the first certainly in BC, maybe Canada, but it's the new Tesla battery home system, so that the home can run literally off the grid, so a net zero home. So I was quite interested to hear that that was going to be introduced. He's already placed the order, so he's on the waiting list for it to arrive. And pretty exciting if it all comes together and works as well as it's supposed to. They've certainly mastered the electric car, so I have full faith that the home system will be equally as good. And we'll certainly keep you posted if you're interested in how that works over the course of the coming years. And that's, again, just a feature of the landscape plan that we talked about earlier, and shows what's being proposed for Hobbs Creek in the back of the property. In a nutshell, I think it's pretty straightforward. The variances, in my opinion, are not excessive. The RS12A zoning has some limitations to it, particularly with the height, but other than that, it's really no different than any other of the residential zones in Saanich. So I'll leave that with you. If you have any questions, I'm certainly available. And as I mentioned, Patrick Lucy is here, as well as the property owner.
All right, thank you. We got a question from Councillor Dermott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Mr. Tinney, I certainly remember this from having been before council at an earlier date. One of the things I noted in here was the consideration of sea level rise and climate change. But I think the measurements are perhaps somewhat out of date. Certainly in recent months, the median estimates of what climate sea level rise will likely be within the century have gone up considerably. Is that something that you guys have considered? I don't want to push the building higher, but nevertheless, I really don't want to see it underwater either.
Yeah, no, very much so. The local geotech firm, Risic, who's been in the area for decades, is involved in the project as well. So they're dealing with the foundations as well as the finished floor elevation, and they've established that I think is 0.91 meters above mean high tide. And based on all of their calculations and what they've been sort of following in the area, 0.91 meters apparently is going to be adequate for this location.
I hope they're up to date, but I'll leave that up to you. One other question. In terms of Tesla's battery system, what are they using to source that, to energy source?
You mean like solar panels on the roof?
Yeah, anything that they're including that.
There it
I
is.
wonder, because you're not net zero if you're
Right,
just putting it into the battery off the grid.
Yeah, and
So-
I'm certainly no expert on the new Tesla system, but apparently when operating at full capacity, it has the ability to feed energy back into the grid. Which is,
Yeah, BC Hydro now allows for that.
Yeah.
Fairly recently, but they do.
so it's not a small undertaking. It's probably about a $60,000 plus upfront investment. But again, the homeowner likes that sort of stuff, new innovative materials, and I think it's exciting that he's willing to give it a try.
Well, good for him, and by the time you build this, it'll probably be cheaper. Thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant before I ask the public to come forward? Seeing none. All right, thank you, Mr. Tinney.
Thank you.
All right, if any members of the public wish to speak, please come forward. Calling for a second time, any members of the public that wish to speak?
I'm Roland Rocchini, and I live at 3781 Mystic Lane, and I'm going to speak in opposition to this application. I live directly across from the proposed house, across the pond from the proposed house on Mystic Lane, and my objection is based on a fairly simple fact. That is, with the house built under the present regulations, we actually have a partial view of Cabra Bay. Now, if the height and front yard setbacks variances requested are allowed, that view will disappear. And obviously then this means that our enjoyment of our own property will be lessened, and I think also it will probably affect the value of our property. Now, it's true that there are some houses along Waring Place that exceed the height limit, but these are exceptions that were granted a long time ago. They are basically outliers, and I don't think such exceptions should be used to justify exceeding the present height limits. To be in keeping with most of the houses on Waring, this new construction needs to meet the present height rule. I think the reason the rule is there is pretty obvious. I mean, it's there because these are waterfront properties, and so excessive height is obviously something that's quite undesirable when you're building right on the waterfront. Now, you might ask why my objection did not appear in the planner's report. to council, and it's the reason being, I only found out about this just over a week ago from a neighbour. This actually was going ahead. Neither Saanich nor the Cadbury Bay Residents Association, who both have approved this application, contacted us or informed us or asked our opinion on the matter. Now, it seems to me that talking to those who will be directly affected is more important than talking to people who maybe don't have a special interest in the whole matter. I mean, it's true that in 2010, approval was given to a previous owner to increase the height. But I'd like to tell you that we weren't contacted then either, and remained ignorant of the whole thing. I think, luckily for us, the owner at that point chose not to proceed. Now, why we've been left in the dark about this whole thing, I don't know. Because it seems to me, if you're going to increase the height of a waterfront property, you would think that the most logical concern would be to find out if anybody's view will be obstructed. So I think that the fact that no such consultation took place is, to me, a major flaw in the whole process. I just think that the builders should be able to readily figure out a design for this property which meets the present regulations. And I would ask you to vote to make sure that they do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any of the members of the public who wish to speak? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Paul, welcome. My name is Eric Daly, Chair of the Cadbury Bay Residents Association. We support this application, and we applaud the owner for, as they work their way through the EDPA minefield. This matter, there was an on-site visit by members of our executive, including our pro bono biologist. It came up at a regular meeting. It was on our website. And so, following all of that, all of our due diligence, we support it. And the only thing that I would ask is that as we're welcoming this beautiful new house on a beautiful stretch of beach, that please get on with getting the derelict boats off of that beach so these people won't look out at a boat graveyard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Calling for a second time.
Evening, Mr. Mayor and Council, Mr. Tinney, and the biologist. I'm George Iwanis. I live right next door, 3785. I do like the restored area. That's very nice. And I just have a few small questions. One is the natural boundary on lot 8088. That's forward of the present wall, so it's a surveyor's boundary. It looks like it's about a meter forward. You can see it in your plan. It's, if you have it in color, I'm sure you do, it's red, the red line on the beach. It slants a little bit towards the lot. So the setbacks really aren't from the current wall, but they're from beyond the wall onto the beach. It looks like it's about a meter. Would that be roughly correct? Sloping down to less than, anybody know that? Members of the public. Interesting concept, but from my view and looking at the scale, I'd say that's about a meter. So it's a little bit different than if you took it from the actual wall where all the other houses are. So that extends that little area. The second question is the Tesla batteries, since I live next door, where will those Tesla batteries, does anybody know?
Inside the garage.
Inside the garage. He's a brave man, that's good. Okay, I hope they're not lithium ion. So, going on, the restored area. What kind of, the riparian area, what kind of plants, indigenous plants, or whatever will be on that area? Anybody know? There's a biologist here who probably knows.
Could you address the council?
Sure.
It's,
Yeah. Could somebody get that information from the council?
I made a note of it, and,
Yeah. We can have them talk with everyone, that's good. That's great. I think that's about it, that's all the little technical errors I saw. Obviously, it is a challenging location to build on because of the various things. Sea level will be an interesting point, particularly if there's a storm surge. But I mean, I think the 0.91 meters brings it up slightly above the house that was there in 1950, the original one, which had sunk about 0.91 meters. So I think it's a very nice design. There will be certainly height issues with it, but from my perspective, there isn't. So thanks very much.
thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Please come forward.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Bart Cunningham. I live on 3775 Mystic Lane. I'd like to speak against this proposal. My main issue is the height variance, and this will, because it will affect many of the properties on Mystic Lane as well as back from Mystic Lane. And contrary to what the Cadbro Bay Ratepayers Association said, I was not aware of this until just recently. I was not asked. Now, I do recognize the difficulties of building a home in an established neighborhood. Everyone is telling you what to do. Everyone's got their finger in this. And I say this because I just recently built a home on Mystic Lane, and everyone had their input into it, and everyone had their comment about it. My house, the existing house, was about a couple of feet above variance. I did volunteer in responding to the community. I did voluntarily respond by reducing the height variance to more within variance. I moved the property away from the line. It was right next to the property line, and I did a couple other things to respond to the needs of the community. My point is that we can try to recognize the needs of the community as well as the difficulties of building a home in a contrary area. So, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come forward. I'll call for a third time. Any members of the public who wish to speak? Okay, I'm going to close public input. Before I call the applicant and the environmental expert up to the microphone to answer the question posed by Mr. Irwanis, I just want to clarify from staff how we notify residents in the area when there are development or variance permit applications.
When a staff report on a development variance is being considered by council, the area radius is a 50-meter radius of the subject property, notifying of the item coming before council. I would defer to planning if there are additional notification that is carried out in the preliminary development stage.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. If I can ask planning just to expand on that, we know the radius, what is the method of notification?
In terms of the method, it would be a mail out, Mr. Mayor. The application is also put on the Saanich website under active applications, and all the information about an application is available there, including the contact name for the planner who is editing the file.
All right, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that the residents in the radius are notified directly via mail. What notification time is provided in advance of it coming to council?
In advance of the item before the council is a 10-day notice.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to ask the applicant and the environmental expert, Mr. Lucy, to come to the microphone to answer the question that was posed earlier, if they'd be so kind.
Would you like us to speak about the landscaping that was one question was asked? Patrick can elaborate more than I can, but certainly I know Patrick and the landscape architect and the Saanich environmental planner worked extensively for many months putting this together. So Patrick can elaborate further on that if you want more detail.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Lucy.
Well, good evening, Mayor, staff, council, for and against public. My name is Patrick Lucy. I'm an aquatic ecologist, and I have been working on Saanich watershed since 1980, and on this particular creek since 2000. It's really complicated. So this is a challenging site because there's a very narrow, straight channel that leads from Mystic Pond, which is just to the west, and is the bridge between the pond and the ocean. When we looked at this design originally, we had actually recommended a cross-section so that we could get two different types of planting structures. Plants that were obligate riparian species, sedges and rushes and cattails and bulrushes, that sort of thing. And then a higher elevation set of plants, so small shrubs and not a lot of big trees because you don't want to block the view of the people up higher up the hill. What we discovered after the original application had been held off and this new applicant came in, is there's actually a number of invasive species. One in particular, Japanese knotweed, and it's a really nasty plant. And what we don't want to do is start moving a lot of soil because that could result in the spread of this particular plant. So we've changed the structure so that it reflects more accurately the structure that's there right now, which really looks like a ditch. It's quite U-shaped and it receives water coming in from the ocean and then fresh water going out. So the intent now is to plant more upland species, more shrubs, more grasses, and really focus on a very narrow range of species that we would like to invite in. So small neotropical birds and butterflies and a number of different types of insects that are really important for the fish species that inhabit Mystic Pond. So it's been a real challenge trying to work with the landscape architect and come up with a mix of species that will not cause an exacerbation of this existing invasive species problem. I'm not sure if that answers the question that the gentleman in the back raised.
It does, thanks, Art.
Yes, and are there any other questions?
Councillor Haynes, you have a question?
If I may, Mr. Lewis,
Yes.
please. With the Japanese knotweed, I understand what you're saying. The species that you're introducing, are they able to outcompete it so over time it's reduced? No, it's there.
No.
Things trying to restrain it.
This is extremely aggressive. And it is an issue that Saanich is actually doing really well on managing. I detected a slight accent, perhaps, and where that accent originated, Japanese knotweed is now a major national problem in England. Not so much in Scotland or Wales because of the climate and the soils, but in England it was left unattended, and it is now a national emergency. And Saanich, full-plate Saanich, are very aggressive in trying to control this. The reason I had cramps earlier is because I spent the entire day crawling around in the bush in Shawnigan Lake addressing some of these same issues. And there are places up there where it's completely out of control.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Haynes?
Not on plants, but on the retaining wall, there was a question from the audience on how far it extends into the beach beyond the previous distance of this retaining wall. Would you like to talk to that? They mentioned a meter.
I'm not a surveyor. I understand the question, which is a disassociation between where the actual retaining wall is and the natural boundary, which is a survey point established to determine where the ocean stops and essentially the land begins. And I'm not a surveyor and I'm not qualified to comment on that. On a riparian zone, yes, but not on a natural boundary. That's outside my area of expertise.
Mr. Tinney is there, he could talk to it.
Perhaps, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Tinney.
Does this image help at all, either for the person who asked the question or your subsequent comment? It's, as Patrick mentioned, the property line is sort of the high mark or natural boundary established by the high tide, which is actually outside of that retaining wall that's on the back of the property. I'm not sure though what the question was, Eric. Are we trying to find out where we're measuring from? Is that the nature of the question?
He seems to suggest it was extending a metre further than he was expecting or was previous.
In terms of measuring that foreshore setback requirement?
Yes.
Yeah, that's probably right. I much like Patrick, I don't know exactly survey point that they're referencing. But it's quite possible it is roughly a metre outside that wall.
Thank you.
See no further questions? I'll now turn this over to council for a decision. Councillor Dermott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move approval of the document.
Second.
And I'll speak to it briefly.
Thank you, seconded by Councillor Bryce.
Thank you. I understand the concerns of the people on Mystic Lane, but this is actually, I think, a considerably better outcome than would have been accomplished with what was permitted in 2010. Things have changed since then. Fortunately, we have, I think, greater sensitivity to some of the environmental issues involved, and I very much appreciate the work that has been done here to protect and enhance some of the natural features that go through and around this area. So in the end, it is a substantial gain, and it is actually some distance removed from houses that are on Mystic Lane. It's quite considerable. That's quite possibly why they were not correctly notified, I don't know. But given the